Welcome to the Here's Waldo podcast, where we sit down with top visionaries and creatives in the video game industry. Together, we'll unravel their journeys and learn more about the path they're forging ahead. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Mintis, founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique video game recruitment firm. This is the Here's Waldo podcast. In every episode, we dive deep into conversations with creatives, founders, and executives about what it takes to be successful. You can expect to hear valuable lessons from their journey and get a glimpse into the future of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique recruitment firm for the game industry. We value quality over quantity, transparency, communication, and diversity. We partner with companies, creatives, and programmers to understand the why behind their needs. Today, we have Moritz Baier-Lentz with us. Moritz is a partner and the head of gaming at Lightspeed, a global leading venture capital firm with 13 offices, more than $29 billion in assets under management, and over 500 investments and 200 exits across the US, Europe, and Asia. Moritz loves to partner with exceptional entrepreneurs and has served as an investor, board member, and advisor to founders who led the creation of games like Fortnite, Call of Duty, League of Legends, Wild Rift, Apex Legends, Overwatch, Sky, Valorant, StarCraft 2, and Warcraft 2. Let's get started. Thank you for being on the show today and making time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'd love to start by hearing more about your background. Can you talk about what led up to you being a partner at Lightspeed?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief just so we have, many other things to talk about too. But my first foray into gaming started as a player about 20 years ago. I grew up to not too much of a parental expectation. My parents had both dropped out of high school. My brother had dropped out of high school. And so my bar was relatively low, which was staying in high school. And I thought that was possible while also playing a lot of video games. I fell in love with Diablo II, peaked out at global #1 twice in 2003 and 2004 in hardcore and softcore. And I used money from those in-game item sales during that time to fund my education, undergrad in Germany and then graduate school in the US. By the time I graduated, I did not really think of gaming as a viable career. And I was very much kind of on a credentialing track and attracted by all the great brands and industries that you have access to after attending business school. And I ended up joining Goldman in the investment banking division, focused on tech initially, did that for 2 years. And then in 2016, a little bit into that job, somewhat naturally came back to gaming and ended up starting Goldman's gaming practice and leading that for about 4 years. I did not want to grow old as a banker. And so in 2020, I decided to make the jump to venture capital, also gaming specific venture capital. So the last 8 years for me basically have been at this, somewhat, weird, but certainly growing intersection of gaming and finance. And joined BITKRAFT when they were early into the fund, scaled it with the management team to, I think, just shy of $1 billion right now. And amazing time, learned a lot during those 3 years, very proud of the investments and also what we built there together. And then have been working with Lightspeed a little over a year now. Was not planning to leave BITKRAFT, frankly, but the opportunity to work with my now partners here and join a firm that's been investing for over 2 decades in, not just gaming, obviously, but enterprise, consumer, healthcare, fintech, blockchain infrastructure, and to build out gaming and interactive media for Lightspeed. That was an opportunity that was a bit too good to pass. So really enjoyed the move so far and, my time here.
Look forward to seeing what you do next. Can you share a little bit more about Lightspeed as a whole and then the gaming and interactive media practice specifically that you lead?
Yeah, so as you mentioned in the beginning, we're looking at about 30 billion in assets right now. A lot of the firms of our size are actually not truly global. So I think that's one thing that's unique about Lightspeed is we do actually have offices across the US, but also across Europe. We have partners on the ground in Israel, in India, in China. And so that's one choice, I guess. The other thing that stands out, again, also for firms of our size, is that all partners collectively invest from the same fund. So there's no gaming fund, just like there's no enterprise fund. There's also no geographic funds. We do split the funds by stage. So there's early stage versus growth stage, because typically for LPs, they have a certain risk profile and preference. So we cater to that. But other than that, we hold everything we find globally and across sectors to the same firm standard for investment. It also means we're sharing the same carry pool. So we're all incentivized, even if it's a company outside of our immediate focus or interest, or whether it's one we invested in personally or not, to help and support. And so, especially in 2024, it feels like a lot of interesting stuff's probably going to be built at the intersection of traditional boundaries like sectors or geographies, like in what is probably a platform shift with generative AI. I really like this setup. It also creates, I think, the right incentives internally, to be externally competitive, but internally collaborative. And I enjoy that part quite a bit. Like, it was a big selling point for me also in the shift.
Can you talk about how Lightspeed and BITKRAFT differ in their investment strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak about the gaming side here, because I think everything else would be a bit of a weird comparison. I mean, there are the obvious things, like the scale is different, the geographic focus is slightly different. The stage is slightly different, because we would look at opportunities in growth stage, while I think for BITKRAFT, it's primarily early stage or kind of like the Series C range of investment opportunities. But I think as it relates to gaming and interactive media, frankly, I don't think the scope is fundamentally different. Like at BITKRAFT, we always looked at studios, platforms, and tech within gaming or adjacent industries. And I carried forward that same perspective to Lightspeed. Making the switch was a good opportunity to kind of like take a step back and reevaluate again from first principles. So I went into this big data crunching exercise between the two jobs, only to arrive at the same conclusion that I think that scope makes a lot of sense. Content is, a lot is said about investing in studios, and we should talk about that if you like, but I have a pretty stern perspectives on studio investing and, where games investing might make sense or not. And so we can chat about that if you like. But
Let's go. Yeah. Tell me about it.
I think I've been on a roughly like 2 to 3 studios per year pace since I started this career as a VC. So in the 4 years, I've actually really only invested in not even 2 handful of studios. I think, strictly speaking, games shouldn't be funded. It should be great games companies that get funded. VC is not a replacement for publisher funding, and the outlook or the interest or the motivation out of which a VC invests is to have this small chance to find a generational company that really makes a dent on the fund. Ultimately, we're in the business of 3x, 4x plus in our funds and returning money to our LPs, and that is a very outlier driven business. And so for our size, for example, for a $7 billion fund, you need to get to a $10 billion outcome before you actually meaningfully contribute to the return profile of the fund. And so most games, even if they work out, don't necessarily have the ambition to become this broad, long-lasting, forever, almost like platform. I think that's the right word. Like, we're looking for things that can be amazing companies and cultures, or long-lasting platforms. And so things like developing your own IP, thinking about live ops from the get-go, launching with a 1-year content strategy, thinking about transmedia opportunities and like all that kind of stuff. I think we'd rather take a small shot at a really big swing than a lot of small ones, because the problem with the smaller ones is that even if they work out, and we've seen like, great indie stories over the last, like I'd say 2 years specifically, it's really hard to build that into a multi-billion business, even if it works. While the companies that are set up like it from the get-go, I think have a slightly larger chance. So that's the bar for the studios is, do we see the light at the end of the tunnel for this to become kind of like a $5 billion plus company? And it's excruciatingly hard to get there, but I at least want to see like that little bit of light. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting to be a gaming VC of scale and not invest in content. That's where we've seen by far the most attractive exits really over the last 20 years, and especially in the last 5 years also. And then once you get to tech and platforms, the air actually gets pretty thin. There are only a few examples of, call it $5 billion plus companies: Roblox, Discord, Unity, Unreal, if it were not part of Epic Games, maybe. So, then for those areas, the question becomes not only, is this something that can attract a decent amount of users or revenue? It's like, how will this be a generational company that really will drive a paradigm shift in the industry almost? So for technology, it's not enough to be a tool or improve workflows and help devs build better, faster, cheaper. It almost needs to produce a new engine. Actually, engines are the only gaming tech companies that have crossed the 5 billion hurdle. Frankly, one. And, again, maybe you could make the argument for two. Kind of like taking that lens sometimes is a little freeing, although it's limiting to look at things in this way and ask yourself every single time, even in the seed round, is this something that can scale to this size? But that's ultimately the business we're in. And I see it when I look at enterprise, consumer, fintech, healthcare companies that my partners bring forward, and how the narrative is put forward in those cases. And again, ultimately, if we don't find anything in gaming or interactive media that we like, we don't have any duty or pre-assigned allocation. Like it'd not be the craziest thing in the world if we don't find anything we love for a whole year.
Yeah, I want to ask you about your strategy because it's quite different than other gaming VCs. So you talked a lot about companies becoming generational. What makes you believe that they're going to be generational?
I mean, this is a good time, I think, to birth a generational company, because a lot of the previous generational companies were the ones that really nailed a platform shift, either from PC console to mobile, or even before that, and internet forward, or connectivity, social connectivity forward approach, when that was a novelty. Take Zynga, for example. There were incumbents at the time that could have owned mobile as a new platform, but it wasn't good enough to just port existing PC console titles over. Having that phone in your pocket and having it on the go creates a completely new way to engage with games, which is a lot more frequent, shorter durations. And so I think it takes companies that are not just playing not to lose, but actually playing to win, to nail these things. And it typically takes a company culture that embraces new opportunities as almost as a foundation for a new venture, where others might just dipping their toes into it. I think we see that again now obviously on the tech incumbent side, there's a lot of strength and advantage as it comes to generative AI, most notably compute and data access. But nevertheless, I think the same thing happens over and over again, which is it boils down to the innovator's dilemma, where we would be out of our jobs if we didn't believe that, and we haven't again and again shown that there is room for innovation from startups that then grow to become the new incumbents. So that's when I say generational company. It's typically a new paradigm shift forward way of building an entire culture and business.
Yeah. So you have to be so different to work.
I think to create value of this size, you have to do something different.
Yeah. What are some of the most common mistakes that you see startups make when seeking venture capital? I want to know the mistakes they make. And also, you said, but not all companies, most companies should not take venture capital. They're a game studio. So I'd love for you to talk about both of those.
Yeah, if you look at the sheer size of game studios started, right? For a lot of them, the publisher funded model, or even bootstrapping a company works for a lot of them. Crowdfunding and Kickstarter works for a lot of them. There's no need to take venture capital, I think, unless you're really reaching very high, and it goes well beyond I have a great game idea to I want to fundamentally build something that challenges Activision Blizzard and Riot Games in the next 5 to 10 years. I think the latter, very few people honestly say that to themselves when they're starting out. And I think most fit into the category of I have a really cool idea and a team that I know can build a great game and would love 3 to 5 million for that. I think those are very different use cases. Yeah. And if you're looking at the sheer amount of games started in a given year, I think, generational companies in quotation marks will see one per year. New games, you'd have to check the statistic, and it depends a bit on how you count, but it's probably in the 10,000s, I would guess.
Yeah. I'm only getting higher. So if people are pitching, I'd love to know, I think a lot of the listeners are trying to raise money, perhaps from you, perhaps from some other fund. But what are some of the most common mistakes you see in a pitch that people could avoid?
For an early stage pitch, it ultimately comes down, I would say 80-90% to the team. And it doesn't mean team credentials in terms of, we've worked at these companies. I think it's more the unique insight and capabilities, and focusing on the skills and the experiences. And a lot of the time I see, we worked on these games, we worked for these companies, but really being explicit what the role actually entailed. And that's an area where we focus for reference checks quite a bit, as well as was this person instrumental in creating something of value? Is this the person that if we ask others on the project who are the number 1, 2, 3 most important people of making this is this a success? Would this name come up we ask on a no-name basis? So it really it comes down, because I'll say, if I get really excited about a team, I've actually never had the case that they're not also building, quote unquote, the right thing. To take the example of a studio, I think the founders I really get excited about, they all build multiplayer. They all usually have a cross-platform vision. There's usually a live ops element to it. They know what, they know about the importance of distribution in addition to building the product. And so it actually rarely happens that I say I love this team, but the idea is not great. I actually think that never happened. I have a lot of the idea is great, but I'm not super sure about the team. And if I've learned one thing in 4 years, it's a very dangerous mistake of falling in love with an idea if you're not 100% convinced about the team. My question that I ask myself is, would I leave my current job and work for that team? And if the answer is no, then it's a no. I like my job, just to be clear.
This is really just a recruitment podcast for you.
Yeah.
Um,
This
what?
is how I invest. I don't want people
Yeah.
like that. So that's how I don't know, look at like 1,000 or 2,000 a year and invest in two, right? Like that's kind of like how so some of the checks I run through my mind. And I might be a terrible investor. I don't even know yet. A lot of my investments, even the ones from the BITKRAFT days, are still pre-launch. So
Yeah.
who am I to judge what's good? Oh, I'll get my receipts in the next 3, 4, 5 years, and maybe this podcast won't age so well.
That's the spirit. Thank you for that. So, what else do you look for in the founding team? What's the ideal size of a team?
Mhm.
You talked a little bit about background being instrumental in making a success successful. And what kind of makeup should you have, like business versus creative versus technical?
Yeah, I with strong preference for founding teams. I think that's a good call out. I don't think any of my investments have been solo founders. It's usually at least two people, two to four. There needs to be at least one person who is a strong CEO, because it is just really important. If we know one thing about the startup or the idea, is that's another reason why team is so important is markets and products will change inevitably. The only thing you can always be certain of is that what you get pitched as a seed deck is not how the company looks when it goes public, but there's a person that will navigate all these turns and pivots. And that's who ultimately you're putting your trust in. So there needs to be a person like that. I think typically that is for studios, it's someone who has been a lead designer or lead producer. The best thing that can happen from a team or talent perspective on a call, and I think it's a little bit harder maybe for studios than it is for platform and tech companies, is we spend so much time thinking through what are actually valid hypotheses, not just chasing trends. It's very easy to I think it's very easy to say that ultimately XR will replace traditional screens. I'd actually find it crazy if that doesn't happen. But when, and when will we see a certain active install base in AR, VR that warrants like certain outcomes? Like that's where we spend a lot of time and talking to research analysts and equity research, and that's an example for XR. Anyway, where I'm headed with this is it's very easy to fall in love with the future. Like AI is going to change things. XR is the future. Like there are many other things where it's just like those are inevitable truths, but in 2 and 5 and 7 and 10 years, and like even if certain trends are great, like how does the dynamic of startups actually capitalizing on trends unfold? And so we spend all our time like talking to people, seeing tons of pitches, even like, for example, prompt to game. I've looked at 25 companies in the last 30 days, which is basically the entire universe, I
Market.
think.
Yeah.
3D assets, right? Like I'm tracking, I don't know, 30, 40 Gen AI 3D asset companies. But, and this is where I finally close this loop, sometimes you find someone who has such an interesting stance and argues from first principles or deep knowledge, deep domain expertise in a way where you really get this nugget that is such a profound, interesting insight. I would say that happens to me maybe once a month, not more than that. And it's always super attractive when it happens because it almost kind of like wakes you up from this cadence of taking pitch calls. And you're like, damn, that actually changed how I think about this. Or, oh, yeah, if this is a unique insight that, if true, is profound. I love those kind of founders.
Do you feel frustrated if you can't invest in them because it's not generational, but you know they have a crazy good idea? Or you're okay because
it's very related. Good. I only get this feeling when it is attached to a lot of potential value creation. So I think they're actually pretty intertwined.
Yeah. I wanted to pick your brain on XR too. What, if you don't mind, is the analysis? When is it going to become so mainstream? It's been the question for a long time.
And so this is, again, I'm a huge fan. Like behind me on the couch are all the headsets, including the Vision Pro, and we've done a lot of testing, subjective testing, in addition to going deep into monthly active users of XR, install base, and shipment projections until 27, 28 or so. The answer here also again differs by fund size. But I think for a fund of our size, it's relatively hard to make a case for outcomes of the scale that turn the needle for us just based on the active install base. And XR enjoys a lot of mindshare, obviously helped by the Vision Pro release last month. But right now, the active VR install base is something like 5 to 7 million or so. It's really hard to make a case to build a game or experience for an audience of 5 to 7 million when you can build a mobile game with a potential market of 3,000 million. And then, to see that, for example, the Vision Pro will ship an estimated 12 million units in that time frame, that doesn't really get you a lot more comfortable that there's going to be, I'd say like 100 million install base, or ideally 200 million active install base. Active is also a key word in XR because right now we don't see a whole lot of strong recurring monthly active usage. And so again, I'm a big fan. I enjoy the experiences, but if I'm perfectly honest with myself, I also come back to XR not as much as I think. Although it looks so amazing, and I'm just gonna grab my gamepad because it's right here and then play another round of Rocket League. It's just more convenient right now.
Yeah.
But I can't wait. VR, I think is cool, but I can't wait to have actually reasonably working AR glasses. I think it's going to be a big productivity booster.
Yeah. There's Jerry from Tilt 5. You can connect with her.
I invested in Tilt 5 when I was. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's a really small games world.
Yeah.
That's funny. So would you invest in a company very early stage where all of the founders didn't come from games? I'm guessing no. Or if some of the founders didn't come from games, you think that it's possible to make a game or a platform if you have an outside perspective?
To build a studio?
Yeah, to build a studio or to build game tech.
I think game tech for sure. And there are examples. Traditional, like studio in the traditional sense, I think the answer would be no for investment. Can they pull it off? I mean, people can always do amazing things. So I think it would be intellectually dishonest to say no. But I think if you're not coming at it from the traditional industry, then the approach should probably also be non-traditional, because you kind of have to almost win on your quirkiness. So If
Yeah.
it could be a UEFN or Roblox forward or exclusive kind of like approach to rolling up content and iterating and testing really quickly or stuff like that. We see quite a bit. I mean, that makes sense to me. This is also something we look at. I almost put that more in the category of platforms. But yeah, also super interesting combinations are teaming up a very experienced, traditional game designer with a deeply knowledgeable AI expert who's new to games. Like, combinations like that, I think are where the magic happens.
Yeah. So it can happen, just not in the studio. What question do you wish that entrepreneurs would ask you that they don't ask
Hmm.
in games?
I mean, we usually reserve ample time for founders to also get to know us. I think it's always a nice sign that they are being thoughtful about who they're partnering up with. Because, if this all works out, we're going to be in it together for like 10 years
You're getting
plus.
married. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. People say that always like, it's like a marriage. I don't think it's like that. I don't know those people's marriages, but maybe their marriages are not as great, or they kind of like over dramatize a bit. But yeah, I mean, a lot of my portfolio companies I talk to every day. More than half I talk to every day, I think.
Oh.
Um, if they want that. I've one portfolio company where I speak with the CEO every 2 to 3 months or so, because they're really just heads down on building. But yeah, I think, it's great when founders are inquisitive and the whole thing turns a little bit into the reverse pitching motion. It's also, I think, the best way to win competitive deals is to let founders naturally find out and learn more about our work as partners. Um, and that's typically best told not through our own words, but by introducing them to existing portfolio companies and just setting them up for, I don't know, dinner conversations with existing CEOs where they can talk about the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah.
Never all good.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is pretty good, I think. So,
That's also the best recruitment strategy. You have a good candidate you want to close,
yeah.
have them talk to different people that work there. There's some parallels. Okay, feel free to anonymize, but I'd love to hear a bit about the best pitch that you've ever gotten and what made it so good.
Yeah. I think this one is easy, actually.
Okay.
Because and I want to put an emphasis on best pitch ever received or seen. This is not necessarily indicative of like most excited to ever invest, because I think it's a lot harder to kind of like evoke that sense of emotion when it's an initial round and it's really just a team and a concept.
Yeah.
And there are some that I've been incredibly excited about, and they're still going great. So far so good on those. But I think I would have to be honest here and pick Gardens in the Series A. And by the way, this was a deal that I passed on in the seed round, and dismissed it for being too indie.
Mm.
Exactly along the lines of what we talked about in the beginning. I thought these are two cute brothers. Sorry, Chris and Steven, if you're listening, who just want to build a game. They always kind of wanted to build, and their background was a bit more on the indie side of things. To be fair, with pretty scaled commercial successes. So there's like one of the interesting things about this team is it's an indie-born studio, but with games that actually managed to cross into the mainstream in a significant commercial way, starting with Journey, What Remains of Edith Finch, and then certainly Sky, where Chris was lead designer. Um, People don't know how much money this game is making, especially in China, but it's a lot. I think people would be surprised to find out. But yeah, I thought it's a good team. I also didn't really do my homework on the references, frankly, because I kind of dismissed the product. And then we reconnected when we started the gaming practice around February, March last year. And why this is the best pitch ever is they set up, it was a really clever setup at GDC, where, investors one after another would sit down for what was just a really, really well done, very curated walk through the product vision, which I don't think had changed, but was articulated nicer. If but I don't want to take away the blame from me for not funding the seed round. But then the thing that you can get around is just putting a prototype in front of people that was really so awesome to play. And usually when we spend time with prototypes, especially when it's less than a year of development, it's kind of like looking at someone's baby, where it's just like, you're never really in love with someone else's baby. Sometimes they're just straightforward ugly, and you're kind of like glad it's over. And even if they're pretty, you're like, yeah, no, it's a really pretty baby. But it's actually really rare that you're like, oh my God, like, can I spend more time with this baby? Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna actually cancel what I was planning to do. I just want to hang out here for another 2 hours with this baby, because your baby is so beautiful and so fucking awesome. That really doesn't happen in real life, right? And when it happens, they managed to build something that creates such an emotional involvement and just this desire to explore, and in all the right ways, where the things that make it so special are also the ways in which you can see this really scale and become a big hit. Very fresh, but very mainstream kind of at the same time. And so I was like, damn, we really have to figure this one out. I mean, also like the syndicate that we built around this, and it was Nintendo's first time they got exposure to any early stage company, because they're obviously very cognizant of their brand involvement, and for them to put their name behind this project, I think it goes a long way. And then Mike Moheim, the Blizzard founder and longtime CEO, investing through Dreamhaven, and we have representation from Microsoft and Sony as well. So all three platforms, Krafton and us co-led the round. It was a tight and hard negotiation. The game is about bringing strangers together, and so I feel like they managed to do that even in the syndication. And we, shortly after the Series A, we went on a trip to Japan and Korea, in part to meet with the Nintendo family, but also to visit publishers, regional publishers in both countries early. And it was just, we did the same thing. We kind of like set up these demos. I think then it had evolved to almost like a master class in pitching, where it was just such a joy as an investor to sit through these pitches, with little thoughtful gifts that were brought, concept art on the table to pass around, which some of the investors, or future investors, asked to keep so they could hang it in the office room. So it was like there were some interesting reactions to it all that you just usually don't get. Yeah, it was we had an awesome time there, and yeah. So I'll pick this one for your answer, and I hope I don't offend any of my other babies, which I all obviously
Beautiful.
love. Really,
They're beautiful.
yeah. All of them are so beautiful. Yeah.
You want to spend time with them, you're going to cancel your plans.
Yeah.
How relevant do you think IPOs are right now for an exit strategy for games, or do you think M&A continues to be the primary option?
Yeah, I think for content, my gut feeling is, and just like looking historically, this has been more of an M&A territory, just because you look at not just large game companies, but media and tech companies over the last 5 years really recognizing gaming as the leading media category, and high grossing content is still a pretty scarce asset, and significant premia are being paid. I mean, just look at the Microsoft Activision acquisition, but even before that, ZeniMax acquisition, I think was a good example too. So studios are also not as great businesses. They're still a little bit more lumpy and hit driven.
Yeah.
Even in a game as a service forward world or business model. For all these reasons, I think that's gonna remain M&A territory. And the game or games company that will go public are probably more the platforms and the tech companies, the next Roblox, the next Discord, the next Unity, that operate a little bit more like a software as a service business.
Yeah. You've been a part of so many massive deals. What advice do you have around M&A? When should companies think about being acquired? How should they figure out who to go with?
I mean, that's ultimately, it's a decision. Usually it's a decision for the founder, or it's a decision that's done jointly with investors and board members. I mean, there's so many factors that go into the consideration of what the right timing or moment is. Scale, the founders' desires for the future of the company, probably the two most important ones. Just like with everything in life, and this is the same answer for, certainly for M&A and getting to know potential acquirers early, but for raising a round too. I think most companies I invested in, I've known the team for over a year. On average, it's probably more than 12 months. So don't just go out to raise money when you need it or kind of need it. I get a lot more comfortable to say this is one of the two things we're investing in this year when I actually have history, and it just helps getting comfortable with what is ultimately a pretty big decision. I think the same works for M&A. The best M&A outcomes were probably the ones where a conversation or relationship building has or had already happened for a long time leading up to it. And then M&A processes, like some of the large ones, can take a year.
Yeah. How long did Activision take? More than that.
Yeah. Well, there was a whole regulatory aftermath, right? Like, I think I don't know how long. It's a philosophical question, because this conversation of Microsoft to acquire Activision behind closed doors, that might have been going on for 5 years.
Yeah, it's true. I want to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. You were Forbes 30 under 30. You ran 7 marathons in 7 days. You've done all this wild stuff. But I'm sure you're often one of the youngest people in your firms in your career. Have you dealt with imposter syndrome? And if so, how have you navigated it?
I didn't know we're getting so kind of like deep here, but I'm always a fan for candor and
I
vulnerability
just have some
too.
things I want to know from you.
Yeah. I like talking about these things. So I would say that where the raw drive and motivation for some of these things come from, I'm not so sure. It's certainly not my kind of like socioeconomic environment during the formative years. And ironically, the one thing I can point to is probably the competitive video gaming. As a teenager, like that was probably the only intensity or extremity or whatever that happened in the years where you shape your character or persona. And I do think about a lot of things in life through that lens of gaming, not in a way where I'm like, oh, I need to level up. Like, what does it take to reach the next milestone or whatever. But I think the what was beautiful about Diablo is that Diablo 2. I actually barely played Diablo 1. I was too young. Is there's this almost infinite world of possibilities. So it's this exercise of exploring this vast opportunity space and really trying to argue from first principles to chase global optima, not local optima, because of the skill combinations and especially like item combinations. You could actually you could pursue some seemingly absurd things just to get an edge and break the meta and move the efficiency frontier forward, or would go into great length, even kind of almost like scientific experiments to back solve into the algorithms of the game, many of which were not public to the player. Now a lot of it is baked into the UI, but even damage per second was not straightforward at all. At all. Like, I think it took people like 2 to 3 years to really figure out how to properly calculate the damage you're causing. So I love nerding out, and at some point you kind of get to this point, it's like, okay, maybe I should look at my whole life this way, where it's just like start ignoring what everyone else is doing and just ask yourself, okay, what, maybe play around mentally a little bit, and then just like play around with the boundaries of things, whatever that means, whether that's moving to a different country, or I applied to business school technically without an undergraduate degree. Yeah, optimal solutions are extreme, just from a mathematical perspective. So I think to live an optimal life, by the same logic, it needs to be somewhat extreme or weird. And the crazy ultra race is like the main motivation is really to live life to its fullest. It's kind of like a more adult version of YOLO. Like,
Yeah.
I enjoy doing crazy stuff just for the craziness itself. And and it's just the audacity to just sign up for the stuff, knowing that there's always a way to kind of figure it out. Like, obviously I trained, but you don't need to be a professional athlete. Ironically, you don't need to be a professional athlete at all to run 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. It sounds like this insurmountable task of like freakish outlier physical performance. I think if you can run a marathon in 3 hours, 30 minutes, you can probably run 7 of them in 7 days.
Just a mental game. You like that?
Oh yeah. I mean, like the mental part, I can take that away from people, but yeah.
What do you think?
At no time during that race did I think I'm not going to be able to do it, or that I regretted it. There were other races. They were worse. Like Marathon des Sables, which is like 7 days through the Moroccan Sahara, and it's self-sufficient and self-navigated, which means you need to carry all gear, food, shelter on your back during that week too. And it's in the sand, and it's 100 degrees, and you're also cut from civilization, so there's no communication with the outside world. So that was a lot worse, and there were like real moments of darkness. But the beauty of the human mind is that once you reach the finish line, you may not think that this was a good idea net, and that maybe in this weird outlier case, the short-term pain was actually not worth the long-term gain. But somehow, beautifully, your mind and your biochemistry makes you believe just a couple months later that everything was great, and you look back at it with a smile, which is how I think about it right now. I definitely always recommend it to my enemies, but maybe also my friends, some of which are actually doing it. I think maybe, in 2 months is the next one. Yeah.
Makes you feel alive, and it helps you push your limits. I like to cold plunge a lot, which is nothing like quite to your extreme, but it makes you feel really alive. And if you can dunk yourself in really cold water voluntarily in the morning, you can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I like warm showers. So like seeing like everyone's a little different.
A little different.
Yeah.
No, I think you'll get into cold plunge. That's super on brand for
No,
you.
I've done them. I like them too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. I have one last question. Before I ask it, I want to point people to the Lightspeed website, gaming.lsvp.com. The last question is, if you could give founders who are preparing to pitch their game studio one piece of advice, what would it be?
We already talked about a few things. I think early relationship building is important. Thinking about presenting something that's truly unique and insightful, I think for me, that's the number one, most impressive or most engaging thing to pull off. I would spend time to look at previous investments that the partner you're talking to has made, because I think that's ultimately reflective of the types of businesses and the types of people they're most drawn to.
Yeah, and reach out to a specific partner with a reason.
Yeah, that's almost table stakes. I feel that should certainly. It's also sometimes people think, oh, if this person didn't like us, I'd just reach out. And like the very first thing we do when we get an inbound that we're not sure about is we check in the CRM and it pulls in the history. So the very first thing I would do is send it to whoever spoke to the company last, and it's a net negative look to do it. Like we all talk behind the scenes a lot. We're not, again, internally, we're not competitive with each other. Like a lot of the deals we end up doing were sourced by a different partner, and we pass them along internally based on expertise. Interestingly enough, in over a year now, I've never seen a single instance where there was like an internal fight about who's running with the deal or leading a deal. We only have one person for each area of expertise to write a check, and so it's very clear who's the best fit to diligence or invest in something.
Makes sense. We've been talking to Moritz Baier-Lentz, who is partner at Lightspeed. Moritz, where can people go to pitch you or contact you or learn more about you?
Yeah, we have our gaming specific microsite, gaming.lsvp.com. We also have the Lightspeed website, which is without the subdomain, game@lsvp.com. I'm thinking too much about gaming. And then, we have all our emails on both sites. And that's also something that sometimes surprises me at conferences or in in-person events. People are like, okay, can I get your email? I'm like, sure. But it's just publicly available pretty much in everywhere we're trying to be. We also have a form on the gaming site to submit pitches, and everything lands in my inbox. I promise people I look at everything that arrives. The thing I wouldn't recommend is LinkedIn or social platforms. While I try and monitor that as well, I know that historically I've missed stuff there. That does not happen when it comes via email, either through the site or direct email.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the show this week. To catch all the latest from Here's Waldo, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. We'll see you next time.